We aim to bring openness, curiosity, and understanding, not sensationalism. But listener discretion is always advised.
Always advised. Okay, Heather. I would argue that today we're traveling through time definitely further back than we've ever gone.
Whoa.
But we're traveling through time pretty extensively. And by that I mean we're going to go from maybe 7th century BC to present.
Oh my God. Okay. What do I pack?
You're going to have checked baggage for this one.
Yeah. Okay.
For sure. So, before I get started, I would like to say we do not condone the usage of drugs recreationally in any capacity. Okay?
Right, yes.
We do not encourage it. We do not condone it. I also would like to state that there are quite literally people's whole entire lives dedicated to some of the things that we are going to discuss. I have been studying this for 3 days.
So you're an expert.
So obviously I'm an expert. I've done my very best to only accumulate the things that are alleged, that are proven, that are factual, that are backed by archaeological and historical evidence, blah, 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 all the things. That's all. Those are all my disclaimers. We don't have any content warnings for today, really. We're speaking pretty generally about several different recurring things. Today we're following Urget through time.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So this is the follow-up episode. This is, I would say, we're just going to name it part 2 or the second episode of this multi-part series.
Second installment.
Installment of sorts, right? So the first episode of this specific installment, we talked about the Acid King. We talked about a gentleman by the name of Ricky Casso. He unfortunately, under the influence of many different drugs, one of them being LSD, or also known as a chemical compound or a compound called ergot that is found on fungi. We touched briefly on the history of LSD, which we'll get a little bit more into today. But that feels like a really good foundation. So if you haven't listened to that one yet, I would listen to that one first. And then some things that I say in here are going to be continuing off of that vein. And then the next episode that I do, and again, over and over again, so this will keep happening. So highly recommend you start from the beginning. With that being said, I would like to introduce this underpinning of this entire episode. So across every culture, every century, every continent that we're going to move through today, every single time that a human being has encountered the specific molecule, whether they knew what it was or not, they reached for a similar explanation. So, some of them called it God, some of them called it the devil, some of them called it possession, some of them called it ancestors, enlightenment, or even madness.
Okie dokie.
I'm going to try to keep my excitement right bubbled up at the surface, because the more and more I have learned about all of this, the more my mind is blown and the more I've thought about so many of the things that we've already talked about. Obviously. And how everything, like I said in a text message I sent to you, is everything is connected.
It's all connected.
So we're going to go, again, like I said, all the way back. We're talking about ancient world, things that we know archaeologically and evolutionarily. Again, we're talking about ergot. Of course, we'll never really know when humans first discovered ergot. That's obviously something that we could never understand or specifically know. Or just any mind-altering psychedelic properties, plants, fungi, just in general. Just to put us in a timeline here, we're traveling, or we're going to be specifically in right now, 1500 BC to 392 AD. So these mystery cults over centuries. So these mystery cults, the Eleusinian mysteries, were one of many. So across cultures, across timelines, right, there's just many different renditions of these mystery cults. And the reason why they're called mystery cults is because they were secret religious ceremonies that were dedicated to specific gods and goddesses. But this specific one, this mystery cult was dedicated to the goddess Demeter and her daughter Persephone.
Okay.
So it was centered on themes of death, rebirth, and spiritual enlightenment. Participants drank a sacred brew called kykeon before entering an inner sanctum. So think like, this is incomprehensible. Plato and Aristotle attended these. Okay. So emperors and those who were enslaved both attended. There was no, it crossed barriers as far as like economically, regardless of social status. People, regardless of their status, were sworn to absolute secrecy. And these ceremonies continued for, like we discussed, 2 whole millennia, and only ended when these specific sanctuaries where these ceremonies were performed by the Christianization of the Roman Empire in 392 AD. Very little is known about these initiation rites. So conceptually it was, and there's this really great YouTube video that I watched for those of you who are interested in learning more about this, that's just very, historical and fact-based. But basically this was a initiation into this specific cult or group. Mm-hmm. And with Eleusinian mystery cult specifically, you would travel I think they said 2 whole kilometers. And along the way, they would perform like songs and different rituals along the way. And then once they were there was these specific things that they enacted. And they first started off with what we do know is that they would, by, depictions that have like survived of like these ceremonies, is that they would do like an animal sacrifice. And that would start the ceremony. And then they would drink this specific drink. So this is the part that I really geeked out about, and why I decided to do this episode today is because just last month, a scientific study was published that answered this question about this huge question mark that archaeologists and historians did not know what was in the drink that they drank.
Oh, it's good to see that we're really prioritizing what we're researching currently.
Well, so Hoffman himself... It's so... Wait, no.
It's a few hundred years before old Jesus came walking about, and we're like, hey, you know what? Not much going on in the world right now. You ever wonder what they were drinking?
Well, okay, but okay. That's actually so legitimate to be. Here's what I will save this by saying. By knowing what they drank, it now answers the question that's been asked for thousands of years, hundreds of years.
Perfect. Great. If that drink shows up in the Epstein files, we'll certainly know all about it.
Okay, so you're kind of touching on... This is me putting my tinfoil hat on. It's like, okay. Okay. This does have to do with government. So, just like a gentle, we're gonna get there, but now I'm like, okay, maybe this is darker than I want it to be. This is getting darker by the moment. So Hoffman himself spent decades in his later life arguing that kykeon contained the ergot derivative, which would obviously be a psychedelic compound that he recognized in his own research and his own synthesis ability. The problem was always the same, though, is that ergot untreated is deadly.
Right.
So that was always the hang up that historians got hung up in, is like,
it's like, if it was so deadly, how are they meeting?
How are they surviving? Yes, exactly. Yeah. How are they surviving this? So how could ancient Greek priestesses have safely administered this lethal fungus to thousands of people for initiation rite that wouldn't have led to all of them dying? Exactly.
Well, how could people pass a venomous snake around a church and not lead to them dying?
I mean, that's a really good point that I don't know what to do with. Okay, so the study that was just released that I'm like totally geeking out about, that they found the answer to all of life's questions that Heather is also very excited about. Researchers found out that by boiling ergot fungus in lye, yes, just from simply combining wood ash and water, which would have been available in ancient households at a specific alkalinity for 2 hours, completely detoxifies it, but keeps the psychoactive compounds intact.
But wouldn't ingesting lye kill you?
I don't think so. Because once you do specific things with lye, it's no longer... See, these are the things that I don't have answers to.
Or we can cut my question out. Because, I mean, you can, like, dissolve a body in lye.
Yeah, food grade lye is safe to consume. Only after it's been neutralized. So maybe by boiling it for 2 hours, it neutralizes it? We need a scientist. We need a scientist stat. It must be diluted.
They might still be working on that piece. They seem to be really taking their time.
Oh, okay, here we go. So lye on... Let's see, because the lye on their surface reacts with carbon dioxide when heated, it transforms it into a harmless carbonate. Boom. There you go. So when it's heated to a certain temperature, which again, like I said...
So if you're making like a tea,
yes,
and you're boiling it, you're doing two things at once. You're making it so that it's safe to ingest, and then the LSD piece of it too is safe to ingest.
Yes. So the ergot, yes. So the ergot becomes to where it's not as poisonous, and then the lye is basically neutralized, and it can be consumable, and it has all of its hallucinogenic properties and psychoactive compounds. So in these ancient times, they had everything they needed. Now, you know what was really funny I did think about? How many people had to die in order for them to figure this out?
I mean.
Yeah. So...
test this batch.
Just
Take a listen to this.
It's like the person in, in old times that had to, like, taste test for the king.
Yeah.
It's the same thing, really. So we're going to kind of blow through. There's lots of other details that I'm not going to go into. But kind of the really cool pin here to finalize this discovery is that historians and archaeologists were excavating a Greek colonial site in Spain that was linked to these mystery cults. And they found fragments of ergot inside of a ceremonial vessel and inside the dental remains of a 25-year-old man that was buried there. So ergot was found between his teeth, and he had consumed it. So it's proven that they consumed ergot to some degree or another in ancient times.
What if it was actually just that one guy, and he was just
he died.
gnawing on it?
Yeah. And he died. That may very well could be the case.
He's changed the trajectory of all science, and he was actually just like the local Looney Tune that was just like...
He's just like...
much.
He's like, actually I know this will kill me, so I'm just going to do it.
It's terrible here.
That's funny. Okay, so it's ancient Greece. Okay, do you know what St. Anthony's Fire is?
No.
Okay, so we're going to jump to 857 AD to the 17th century. Okay, so we're talking about historical record here. This is another little solid tidbit about this continuation of ergot through time. Obviously, we're jumping forward a few thousand years. Mm-hmm. The same molecule goes from sacred ceremony to a pretty mass catastrophe. So because when ergot wasn't being carefully prepared, obviously, by trained priestesses and that 125-year-old guy who wound up having it between his teeth, obviously, it was growing on grain across medieval Europe, and nobody knew it was there. Uh-oh, indeed. It's been described as a great plague of swollen blisters. People were completely consumed by rot. There was like this whole description of basically like people's limbs rotting off and falling off of their bodies. So, and another outbreak killed between 20,000 and 40,000 people in France in 944 AD. So
Bonkers.
Isn't that crazy? Tens and tens of thousands of people just had no idea that this was on the bread that they were consuming. So the disease follows a specific horrifying progression. So first it would be a faint burning in the skin, and then there would be red spots, and then swelling that turned bright red, and then they would have hallucinations so vivid that the sufferers believed demons were dragging them to hell.
Well, and not to spoil alert, because I know you're going to get to this, but that's why it's such a theory for the Salem witch trials.
Exactly.
Though I do think that more recently they've kind of thrown
Debunked
that
it.
one out. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
That makes sense.
yeah, there are historians who argue for it, and then there are people who are like, wait, no, this doesn't fit the mold, even though you want it to, kind of a thing. It's one of those things where it's like, okay, but this would work so well fitting in
But
here,
the symptoms like weren't quite the same.
they don't line up perfectly. Yeah, we'll definitely touch on that. So after all of these deeply terrifying hallucinations, the person would experience gangrene, and then obviously they would lose limbs. Some of them survived as amputees, which I cannot even
No.
what that would entail, and so many of them didn't survive at all. So in 1093, an entire monastic order was founded specifically to care for only these victims who were experiencing this thing that nobody knew what it was. So they chose their patron as Saint Anthony of Egypt because of the enduring of the demonic visions in the desert. That's how this specific disease took its name, known as St. Anthony's Fire. So monasteries began hanging detached gangrenous limbs above their entrances
Sorry.
as signage
Good night.
for them to... Yes.
They could make like a sign, like a vacancy, no vacancy.
You
kind
know,
of
at
sign.
you know what they had plentiful was
Limbs.
limbs.
It's just some guy's arm pointing to the
No,
door.
really. And then his other arm is like pointing down the hallway. It's like, yeah. That's exactly what I had envisioned as well. You know.
Oh my god.
So one nobleman who came through, and what I can only imagine was the best thing since quite literally sliced bread at the time, was that a nobleman came through and was like, hey, I have a cure. And he called it holy grains, but it was really just uninfected rye.
It was actually just Frosted Flakes.
It was just...
And he's like, and you'll stop masturbating.
And you'll be fine. It'll all work out.
Okay, go on. I'm curious about this man.
Yes. So, well, we don't really know much about him. But basically,
Scientists are still looking into that one.
they didn't find any ergot in his teeth. But basically this grain didn't have any fungus on it. And so thousands of people described this as some sort of like miraculous recovery, but it wasn't a miracle at all. It was just like bread that wasn't moldy, you know?
It was just that they stopped poisoning themselves on a daily basis.
Literally. Okay.
So not a cure in a sense that it was reversing anything. It just stopped it from progressing.
Exactly. And so then it's like, okay, if you eat this type of bread, then you won't be sick. So they didn't
eat my
put
sourdough.
2 and 2 together.
I do it differently than everybody else, so therefore somehow it tastes different than all the other sourdough.
It's miracle sourdough, Heather.
It has no poison in it. That's actually the only difference. This mother, poison-free.
Poison-free mother. Okay, so 14th, 17th centuries. We're going to kind of breeze past this. So this is one that a lot of people have never really heard of, but it's one of the strangest things in the history of ergot is between 14th and 17th centuries, a whole group of people began dancing uncontrollably in the street.
Yes.
Do you know about this?
Yes.
So
They danced until they died.
Yes, and I had heard of this, but not in this context. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. In Europe, across streets in medieval Europe, by the dozens, sometimes hundreds, were dancing in the streets, even thousands of people, until they collapsed from exhaustion, and some of them died, like you said. And it's crazy because this is documented by like outbreaks. So like quite literally outbreaks of uncontrollable dancing. And one of them was, which is the most documented, was in Strasbourg in July of 1518. A woman stepped into the street and began dancing alone. She danced for days and with almost incomprehensible retrospect, built stages and hired professional musicians to accompany the dancers. And she believed that more dancing might purge whatever illness that she had. And it obviously just, she probably didn't get better, but she probably got worse, to be honest. But
that part feels a little far-fetched. But I remember growing up hearing that. I always pictured basically the equivalent of, what's it called?
Flash mobs.
I was picturing flash mobs, right? Where all of a sudden everyone was just like, and we're dancing and we're doing it and we all know the moves. But then, as I learned more about it later, it wasn't so much that they were like having raves in the street. It was more spasms. It was almost
flailing.
like full body seizures.
Yes, they're like seizing, flailing, throwing their bodies like around for days at a time, and it just like doesn't stop. So obviously, they're going through deeply distressing psychiatric.
Scary. It wasn't like, oh my god, look at those moves. It was
getting it. Yeah. No,
the word dance was kind of generous.
I feel like, and when I read this, I was like, and again, for those people who literally do this for a living, I'm sure there are books written about this. I would love to know more, and I am going to dive more into how do we know that there were professional musicians? How do we know that there were stages built? How do we, how has that been, So this condition was called St. Vitus's dance or St. John's dance. And these tantrums, obviously, in some regions they were called St. Vitus's, in some other regions they're called St. John's, depending on where you're at. So it was understood that it was a curse sent by a saint. Again, a through thread here, it's a curse, right? It's a curse sent by a saint. And that the victims were marched into chapels dedicated to that saint, where the priest would then pray over them for the dancing to stop. So we don't know for sure, right, if ergot caused the dancing plagues to happen. However, some historians argue that this very socially contagious nature and the outbreaks matched the ergotism's neurological profile that a lot of historians argue and discuss. And just like the Salem witch trials, which we're about to breeze past very briefly, there's obviously a lot of unexplainable collective experiences that involve community and body and mind and shared delusion. Again, we don't know for sure. We do have some historical evidence that obviously these things happen, but it's highly argued, and some actually find it an acceptable reasoning behind why these things happened.
Yeah.
Also, it's just so wild to me that ergot is not necessarily always visible. You can't see it. So I just cannot imagine how long it would take people to figure it out that that's what's going on.
The first gluten-free person ever was like, what if I stopped eating this bread? Maybe I'd feel better.
I mean, that's quite literally what I was thinking about. I was like, oh, how did I figure out that what was making me so sick was these multiple things that I was eating in succession? It's I can't imagine. I genuinely can't imagine how long. If it ever even was figured out in real time. Now we can look back on it in hindsight and be like, oh yeah, that's probably what happened, or this is what happened. He's got ergot between his teeth. You know what I mean? We don't necessarily know that about. And just like you were saying about the Salem witch trials, which happened in 1692, and for those of you who are listening who haven't listened to Heather's episode on the Salem witch trials, highly recommend. It's really, really good. It's one of my favorite episodes that we've done so far. Go listen over there if you want further details. But basically, some historians argue that because of the seizing, just like what we talked about just briefly now about this specific seizing, these episodes or fits that these specific people who were accused of witchcraft would do may very well have been explained by an infection of some sorts, or having consumed ergot or a fungus that then would exhibit, you would have these hallucinogenic properties, or these hallucinogenic experiences and episodes, convulsions. There's also this very strong through thread of this specific crawling skin sensation which is not really uncomfortable to even think about. And then some specific Linda Corporeal published a study that in a science journal that was basically saying that it was really warm and wet in the summer of 1691, And that then would encourage this growth.
To grow,
yeah. And then later on, and then shortly after, 2 Salem scholars actually came through and concluded that the general features did not match the convulsive ergotism. That's enough for it to be like a strong conclusion. Obviously, conceptually though, is that there has been this narrative pinned to the Salem witch trials, and I did not know that headlines, and this is where 1976 comes in, is that this study was published that was done that was like, oh, that might be a reason why there was the Salem witch trials. It was published in 1976, and then it exploded across newspaper headlines and articles. I also would love to talk to people who were like teenagers back then to better understand like what was this like sensationalizing happening of the Salem witch trials. But basically, media used this study to say, see, this is how bad an LSD trip could be. It led to the Salem witch trials. And this was like in the mid-70s.
Yeah.
So obviously that was used, again, a perfect description of like what happens whenever we sensationalize things get deeply misrepresented. And then there was this whole spin put on it that, I mean, so many people have probably heard at this point. Okay, so we're about done traveling through time. But St. Esprit, does any of this ring a bell?
No.
So, our bridge here between the medieval world and, I'm going to say more modern day world around the Cold War. So, this is one of the most disturbing events of the 20th century tied to Urget. So, in August of 1951, a small French town by the name of Point St. Esprit, with more than 250 people, where more than 250 people fell violently ill.
Oh.
50 of them were committed to asylums, and 7 of them died. There were some really graphic depictions. I'll just say that. Really graphic depictions were stated by people who were having these deeply troubling and disturbing hallucinations. Women sobbed in the streets that these specific things were happening to their children. Like,
were they all the same or were they all different?
They were all different, but they are not grounded in reality. So, yeah. For example, a specific mother was sobbing in the street saying that her children had turned into sausages.
Okay.
One man believed...
that would be upsetting.
I mean, it would be super upsetting. And honestly, it's like, I say non-grounded in reality. I guess technically, if we want to get really uncomfortably graphic here, it's not like so far detached from reality that it couldn't happen. It was like, okay, maybe a person could get turned into sausages. I don't know.
I see what you mean.
Yeah.
I was like, not in my reality. But then I understood the really dark, way that you meant.
Yes. Yeah.
Of a person becoming sausage. Whereas I was picturing more bippity boppity boop, you're a sausage.
You're thinking VeggieTales.
I was VeggieTales. You were that episode of Buffy where they were making burgers out of people.
Another man believed that he was an airplane and he jumped from the second story window.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So we're talking like some really weird, So patients thrashed in hospital beds, screaming, all these different types of things people talked about. This was one that was a shared hallucination, is that they had flowers blossoming from their bodies. And then children said that their stomachs were full of snakes.
Well, but I guess that's like the skin crawling stuff you were talking about.
Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking. It's like, oh, well, that's, there's a certain way to describe things. And so there was an official, I know. So there was an official conclusion that it was ergot poisoning that contaminated the flour at a local bakery. And that's exactly.
All ate bad croissants.
So they all ate bad croissants, all 250 plus of them. But here's the really interesting part, is that Albert Hofmann, and this is where we're bridging again kind of into more like modern era. So Albert Hofmann, who obviously, again, like we said, is the guy who synthesized LSD from ergot in his lab, only 8 years earlier had traveled to Port St. Esprit, instead of ergot, and he initially confirmed that the ergot theory was likely true, but years later he reversed his position entirely and rejected the ergot connection.
Do you think he did it?
Okay, well, I hadn't thought about that.
Maybe he...
I don't know, Heather. He seems like a really nice man. No. God rest his soul. He seems like a lovely man. I've grown quite fond of him after reading his book. Started reading his book.
I'm just saying.
He believed
convenient.
Well, here you go. Well, here's the thing: is that you're kind of so. In 2009, investigative journalists published a book claiming that the CIA had conducted a covert LSD experiment on the town as part of a predecessor program to MK Ultra.
Yeah.
And that a CIA document he obtained referenced Sandoz's representatives stating that point secret was that it was not in the bread at all, but it was that the CIA had intentionally gone. And now, let me be clear. We do not, again, just as much as we don't know about the dancing and being involved with Urget, we also do not know that this is the case. And what is documented is at the time of the incident, only around 8 to 10 scientists worldwide even knew of LSD's existence, which we're about to get into indigenous practices, because when I say only 8 to 10 people knew of LSD's experiences, I mean like in the quote unquote like scientific way.
Right.
So virtually no one in France at this time even knew what Sandoz was or what they had been doing. And nobody had been promoting LSD at this time. However, some people do believe that it had already been promoted to the U.S. government as a potential chemical warfare weapon.
Right, because I'm also thinking about what you said in the last episode of how it was like, yeah, they were pretty into this whole research part of it, and then sort of overnight it was like, never mind, we're not funding that anymore.
They shut that shit
nobody talk about it
down. And in so many of the different things that I read, it said it quite literally happened overnight, that they completely stopped the production of LSD at Sandoz laboratories. Mm-hmm. So we're just gonna put a big old fat pin in that. Okay. As far as that goes. Again, we don't know. There are different theories out there that are more or less believable than others. But like I said, at this time in the 50s, there were only certain scientists who knew about this from a scientific perspective, but indigenous peoples all over the world have been using plants and fungi in ceremonies. Again, like we said, all the way back to ancient Greece and way before that, I'm sure. Europe was accidentally poisoning themselves with ergot and calling it demonic possession.
Oops.
Other cultures around the world had already spent thousands of years building intentional, sophisticated, living relationships with psychedelic plants.
And probably some like level of immunity.
I also thought that as well. I was like, oh, I wonder over time, like even generationally, right? Like if your ancestors like drank these specific types of medicinal herbs, or whether it's fungi or you're eating it, you're drinking it, whatever, and these very intentional and sophisticated practices, I would imagine that you have to have some sort of immunity to it. But I mean, again, I don't know that for sure. I have no idea how that stuff works. All of this, of course, just like most indigenous practices, or all of them, are by design. And it's accumulated wisdom passed through generations and generations of oral tradition. So ritual use of things like peyote in Mexico and North America go deep into very pre-colonial times. There are numerous peyote decorative figurines and artifacts that have been found from Mesoamerican tombs. Religious and ceremonial use of peyote is still practiced among many different cultures, specific to north central Mexico. These are not like specifically, I want to be very clear that this is not just like old ancient practices. This is also still, even in today's times, deeply traditional and incredibly important practices continue to this day. And they have obviously survived colonization, criminalization, and any sort of like forced conversions into different beliefs and practices. In different communities, like we're saying, there are all of these different spirit medicines, as they're referred to. And so they're not only used to like heal people, but obviously they're also used in spiritual practices. And a lot of indigenous peoples believe that these specific practices open up spiritual gateways to ancestors and promote transcendence through deep connection with nature, the universe, and spirit. Many indigenous elders have been obviously very consistent and explicit by stating that no outside indigenous communities have the standing or the ability to cultivate, sell, or officiate these specific ceremonies or use their medicines. Now, I'm sure that you reading The Wellness Myth has helped illuminate many different things. But what I could not help but think about whenever I was putting all this together was ayahuasca ceremonies have become this very, deeply...
It's actually in that book.
Okay, great. Fantastic.
Yeah. For exactly where you're going with this, right? Of like, this is basically cultural appropriation. This is not how it was intended to be used. It's not supposed to be like, hey, come on out for a little trip and partake in this ceremony one time.
Yes.
Basically have a trip and then go back to your life and feel like, oh my God, I really got so much out of that. Because that's not how the actual indigenous people treat it. It's not like, okay, everybody gather around, let's do this. It's a very specific and structured in terms of how frequently it's done and how it's done and who would do it and why you would do it. And that, listen, that's not to say that the people that are hosting these ceremonies are all terrible, awful people and have no, right to do it. No, certainly some of them actually are indigenous, and if they've chosen to do that, whatever. But broadly speaking, right, it's not cute, and it shouldn't be this thing that you just sort of like, oh my God, I'm just gonna put it on my bucket list, like
to go do ayahuasca.
That's a wild take. Yeah.
I think we're gonna look
ethically,
back on,
it's a wild take.
It definitely is a wild take. I have some very strong feelings about it. It's not like a vacation drug is what it feels like. You're gonna go do this thing and then come back. And like we've said, I think it was in the other episode, or I may have even stated it here, is that so many of these experiences, this compound, these different hallucinogenic experiences, psychedelics in general, activate and illuminate the things that are already there.
Yeah.
So if you're living your life in a certain way, you are engaging with your ego and your internal world a certain way, by doing something like this, you're only amplifying the things that are already there. And if you're not already living in the essence of something like that, I can only imagine. It's like I have hope that you could go and do it, and who knows, maybe somebody listening to this has done something like this before, I don't know, but for you to go and do it and to feel renewed and to feel, and like you're whatever, like a better person, or it's feel like it saved your life, or I would like to believe that kind of stuff exists, but I can only imagine that the way that it has gotten is not great.
But it probably does exist like that for most people that have participated, simply because, didn't we talked about this maybe even yesterday in that episode, when you have been violently vomiting and hallucinating and feeling like you are dying and your whole body is covered in cold chills and sweat, when you finally recover,
that's a really good point.
You feel like you've had some sort of metamorphosis.
That is so true. Food
poisoning can do the same thing to you, right? In the sense of like, oh my God, now that I feel like I can take a breath again, I feel
renewed and
so different.
Just quite literally because of what you put your body through. It's almost like a purging of sorts.
Yes. Yeah.
That makes sense.
But so I think for that same reason, you would be really hard pressed to find someone that's done it that would say, I regret it, or it didn't do anything for me, because you're basically, in my opinion, taking what you put years of work into in therapy or meditation or whatever, and trying to speed it up into a single ceremony in which you're like, okay, I know I've got answers in my own brain. How do I dig them out? And, it's through this.
Yeah, I think it's also too important to note that I'm recognizing that it's like you go and you do it once. And I have watched videos and read about people who go for like a certain set amount of time, who do it over. And I would imagine that this is one of those things where there are many different ways to wear it. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like you can go, I'm sure there are many different types of ayahuasca ceremonies. I'm sure there's many different types of psychedelics that are taken over, either whether it's like a one-time thing, like we're saying. In that instance, I definitely don't think that is, I cannot imagine that being like a great move, great thing to do. However, I guess it could be argued that if you go and do like a whole entire, however long it takes I'm sure it's fit to size as well.
Oh, and I mean, I've seen those where like you go and you stay in bunk beds, right? And you basically live there for a couple months. And to your point, you're doing it every other night or every night or whatever.
I just can't imagine going to do something like that, which I just like couldn't stop thinking about this whole time. But, so obviously it's important to note here that this same molecule that produced mass hysteria in medieval Europe and then was accidentally discovered by a Swiss chemist in the 40s, and then potentially secretly, actually, I guess technically it has been proven that it was weaponized by the CIA. We just don't know exactly to what extent. Yeah. And then the same molecule was then therapeutically researched and then, like you said, pretty much overnight criminalized. That same molecule, had it been held carefully, ceremoniously, like humans had done for thousands of years, it might have turned out differently, obviously, our current relationship with it. Okay, so this is going to be the bookend of this episode, is that what does this stuff do? What is an ego death? What is ego?
Oh, yeah.
I guess structurally, taking ergot in whatever form, whether it's ancient times, whether it's through a tea, whatever. However they did it back in ancient times, and all the different ways you could practice psychedelics in indigenous practices or cultures, and even up into today, the synthesized version of ergot being LSD. What people experience and what exactly is going on is what's considered an ego death. Do you know what an ego death is?
Not in any way that would be helpful. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. To me, I think it's just a humbling of self. Mm-hmm. But I don't think I could explain it any more eloquently than that.
So this episode is kind of like a bridge to, this is going to seem like a really far jump. Have you ever heard of the White Panther Party?
Yes, it does sound familiar.
Next episode is going to be all about the White Panther Party, the Black Panthers. It's going to be about some civil rights activism. We're going to get into, again, like I said from last episode, a rock band, a very heavy metal rock band named MC5. The connector here is LSD and ergot itself. So, obviously, all the traditions that we talked about today, the Eleusinian oh my gosh, it's been a long day. The Eleusinian mysteries, all the peyote ceremonies, all the indigenous practices, all the different groups who have used this specific molecule over time, and eventually what the White Panther Party considered God doses, as they referred to it in Detroit, they would use. Point all to the same experience, and that experience is the death of the ego. So they all just obviously used very different words for it. The clinical term for this is actually ego death, and it's so funny that you say like putting it eloquently, because I had a really hard time putting it eloquently. But to understand why all this matters, basically, is that it's both political, it's all of the things. It's spiritual, political, and why the government was terrified of it. You basically first have to understand what the ego is.
Yeah.
So the simplest way that I can put ego is think of your mind as not just like one thing. So I've told you about my whole like parts work stuff, right? So imagine that your whole entire self, like all of you, is a cast of characters. Think like Inside Out. Okay.
Yeah.
So each one has its own voice and it has its own job and its own individual fear. So this is the part that, you know, there's a part of you that is ambitious. There's a part of you that is afraid of rejection. There's a part of you that needs to be in control. Mm-hmm. There's a part of you that people pleases, so on and so forth, right? So there's a part of you that gets shut down when things are overwhelming. And I could do a whole nother episode on some other things to do with neurodivergence and different neurotypes, but that's not for today. And again, like I said, IFS and parts work is kind of the structure that I use because that's what I understand. That's what I use every day. So underneath all of these different parts, if you get quiet enough, is something that isn't a part at all. It's just you. So that's self. That's your self energy conceptually. Okay. It's calm, it's curious, it's present, and it's not performing. It's just there. So think of the ego, the big E ego, in its most basic sense is the sum of all of the parts that are doing their job, that are the managers. They're the protective parts, the ones that are in place to take care of something when it feels threatening, to tell you all the things that tell you who you are, what you're worth, what is safe, what's not safe. Conceptually, the ego is all of these protective parts all put together. Okay. Yeah. So an ego death, which you can experience with like a high dose of psychedelics, obviously, is essentially when all of those parts that have been doing all this work, doing all the protecting, go completely quiet. So you bypass.
So it's like losing any inhibition.
Yes. So it's bypassing all of the things that tell you what to be afraid of, what you're worth, who you are, what all the things that, like, socioeconomically, environmentally, all that makes you believe who you are and what you are and what you believe in. So now, sometimes this happens for people through deep meditation over a very long amount of time. For some people, it happens in therapy, like, again, over a long period, a very, very long period of time. But whenever you do it with psychedelics, it happens pretty much instantaneously. So it happens all at once, and the narrative of who you are completely dissolves.
Okay.
And the boundary between you and everything else ceases. So you feel like you become everything else. So there is no you really left. So, obviously...
Okay, no, but I think I'm tracking. It's basically like you stop having any reservations, hesitancies, opinions, preconceived notions, and you just sort of are. And then you're set up for either something really great or something really terrible. It's just sort of a gamble. Kinda?
Yeah, it's kind of a gamble. It depends on how you get there.
Because you're like a blank slate, but without recognition of your slated state. You just are.
And you acknowledge that you are just one of everything around you. Like you become a part of everything and everyone else, whether it's people, nature, you're just part of everything else.
Drugs, man.
So the crazy thing about this is that if we were to obviously circle it back to socially, culturally, politically, if in post-war era you got a bunch of people thinking that we are all equally important, that's kind of a problem. And from my perspective, An eco-death is the antithesis of, I would say something like capitalism.
Right.
Say something like a high-control religion.
Uh-huh.
You see where I'm going?
Yeah. Because the everything that you're a part of can either be very kumbaya, or it can be very like, oh, this is the closest thing and I've just latched onto it and now this is my identity.
I mean, yeah, and I would imagine that this is the closest thing, and this thing that I've latched onto would be probably what people experience whenever they're coming from pretty traumatic backgrounds or environments, or right, like you've got
it is your identity.
Yeah, you're doing this like redistribution of self, where you're like no longer So it's I can imagine it could come across as either a relief or like an awakening of some sorts. It could be, there's just so many different ways that we could slice this. So basically, this episode obviously, like I said, serves as a follow-up to the last one and a bridge to the next one. So the through thread that runs through all of this is that from 700 BC all the way to France in the 50s, all the way to in the 60s in Detroit, which we're going to touch on next time, the White Panther Party, this molecule is the through thread. So, what do humans do when something dissolves a boundary between themselves and their environment, between themselves and the rest of either the society that they live in or the natural world? Obviously, they've reached for explanations, and over time, as we said from the very top, it could be God, it could be demons, it could be witches, it could be science, it could be revolution, or it could be what the White Panther Party considered a sacrament, which was the word that I was looking for earlier.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Well, and especially, too, because I keep forgetting that, we're talking about it in such different aspects, right? We're talking about the world where we've taken egret. We're taking the bird.
I've said that on accident a couple times.
We've taken ergot, and we have turned it into a drug. But there's also the world where we've taken it inadvertently and unknowingly, period.
Right.
And so you would reach for some sort of answer because you're not going, whoa, I took this drug and I had a reaction or an experience or whatever. You're just ill and don't know why. Yeah. And it's presenting in very bizarre, scary ways. And so, yes, you would be like, I'm cursed, or, I'm being punished, or whatever.
Yeah. So we'll pick back up, again, like I said, with the White Panther Party out of Detroit in 1968. A band, a poet, a commune, and a political party that the FBI wiretapped without a warrant. Because they were pretty scared about what was going on. So that's ergot and LSD and the history of the very briefly touched on throughout time. And I hope I did it. So I hope I did it.
Way to
did it well.
Or get her done, Jerry.
That's hilarious.
No, I think it was great. Yeah. And I mean, like I said, I keep kind of going back and forth between making it into a drug and knowingly taking that drug versus it just existing on, wheat and stuff, and then ingesting that and
on
not
purpose.
Knowing.
Or like ancient, and
or brewing it in the Elysian cults and then, doing that too. Yeah.
So anyways, that's ergot.
Well, I think you did great. Thanks. Good job.
Thanks. See you later.
Bye.
Bye.